short of living in a dictatorship, that they are capable of making a living and of bringing themselves out of poverty. And I was involved in a very interesting work with a Peruvian economist, Hernando de Soto. And he has a theory that actually poor people can be part of their societies if they have title to the land. They own the land, they just don't have title to it, and they're therefore not able to monetize it. And we had Larry Summers on our group, and the reason Hernando wanted him there is because he liked the saying that Larry had, which is nobody washes a rented car, which means that nobody really improves the land that they don't have title to and own. And so that's one thing, the legal empowerment that comes through getting the poor into the financial system. And also, I happen to believe in the transfer of wealth. I think that there has to be a way that countries that have a very rich class are able to understand that the poor need help. They need the capability of having an education and participating in the economy. The other part, and this is one of my favorite things, is democracy has to deliver. That it's not enough to have elections. People want to vote and eat. And one of the problems that happened in Latin America when there was kind of a movement towards democracies in the 80s was that the benefits of the new system were not shared. There was not land reform, there were not various things that happened, so there need to be reforms. And there has to be a very basic way that the gap is viewed as something that is wrong and dangerous.
That memo that you wrote to the incoming president, what did he do well on, or the best on in your opinion?
Well, I think that, first of all, I didn't know who was going to be president when I wrote it. I think that in going down my list, actually, I think that, so dealing with terrorists, I do think that there has been a systematic effort and a success in dealing with a lot of the terrorist issue. It is no small deal that Osama bin Laden is dead. He's still dead. And that is a big step forward, and in many ways of dismantling various parts of Al-Qaeda and moving systematically on that, dealing more cooperation in how to deal with terrorists internationally. So I think there has been a step forward, and certain plots have been foiled, and so I think that has been a, one never should declare victory in this. I'm too superstitious to do that, but I do think that's moved forward. On the issue of nuclear nonproliferation, I think that that has actually had various parts that have been quite successful. The restart treaty with the Russians, and working more internationally to try to get some better sense of what the Iranians are doing. Talks with the North Koreans have begun again in the last couple of days. And there's real movement on trying to get better control over nuclear proliferation. On the gap issue, I think it's been very hard. And partially because the tool of American assistance is not there. We're watching what is a real problem, I think, in terms of how the new budget is going to come out and how the international community is dealing with this. As I mentioned, this particular panel that I was on, Prime Minister Ballinger was talking about the G8 commitments to emerging countries. What happens in all these international meetings is there are always a lot of pledges. Sometimes they don't really come forward. And then the question, the newest question is, who gets the money? How is it distributed? And so I think there's an issue in that. On energy and environment, and I think the jury's out on that. We were talking about the energy issues and environment. It's been very slow. And on one of the other without being overly partisan, I think that the problems created in the previous 8 years, when President Clinton left office, we left a surplus in the budget. And I would argue a surplus in goodwill internationally. And some of that was frittered away in the previous 8 years. And I think that President Obama is doing his best to build it up. But I think that the arguing that I talked about in my speech is debilitating. There's no question. Compromise actually is not a bad word. And the weirdest thing is when I, as chairman of the board of this National Democratic Institute, when you go abroad and talk to people about what the elements of democracy are, compromise is actually one of it. And so we have some of the explanations of compromise these days appears as appeasement or giving in and giving up. It's as though people have forgotten what the elements really are.
Yeah, compromise is now being painted as losing.
Right.
So, the Arab awakening, you asked the woman, what's next? What do you think?
Well, I think what's so interesting about it is, first of all, I think that it's irreversible. I don't think the Arab world will ever look the same. But it's spread like wildfire. It was interesting, the immolation in Tunisia. And it's interesting because, go back to another point that we talked about with land. What happened was that young man's father died, and his mother could not inherit the land. So they became poor. And he then is there in the market selling something, and he's disrespected by a lower-level public official. And his immolation then was kind of a spark, literally, that went across the Arab world. And it looked as though there were huge similarities in all these Arab awakenings. The truth is that each country is a little bit different. The other problem, I usually, I end up dumping on the media, but I do think that our media covered the initial Arab awakening in a way that made it seem as if everything would end up very quickly. It was covered as if it were a spectator sport within a time frame, maybe a little bit of overtime, but not anything long. When it's actually a marathon, and it's going to go on a very, very long time, and evolve in different ways in different countries. Tunisia's just had an election that's been declared free and fair. It is probably going to have some kind of a coalition government. But in many ways, Tunisia had some kind of infrastructure already. Egypt, it's very hard to tell what's happening in Egypt. I think that the military continues to play a very important role. They're going to go through a series of parliamentary elections in the next few months. We'll see where that leads. Then they have to write a new constitution and have a presidential election. Libya, I think we don't know where that is going. They had nothing. There was just a vacuum between Gaddafi and the rest of the country. So there are no institutional structures. It is a divided society in many ways, and it's going to need an awful lot of help. And the head of the Libyan transitional government was also in Jordan, and he said that they're going to resign. They have a whole roadmap of various elections that they have to go through. But the main thing that happened here, to go back to the point, is there is a huge unemployed young population, and they are educated or uneducated, but they are unemployed, and they do have access to the social media, and the youth bulge has to be dealt with in some way. And what they wanted was dignity. They wanted jobs, they wanted dignity. And the question is, to go back to one of your other questions, is to what extent are other countries capable of providing them with economic assistance that would allow them to create the jobs to employ them. Egypt is in Jordan we just had this discussion. Egypt is actually had a pretty rich country and a pretty good growth rate. It just wasn't being shared with anybody. So, and you've got issues now